Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. As I'm watering the Holey clay pots today, I thought I'd film them at the same time. When the video will actually get posted is I'll slot it in somewhere amongst the other stuff. But I thought as they're out, we'll have a look and see how they're going. Unfortunately, it's middle of the day, so the fans are on, there will be some background noise, and I've turned this one off because I actually film on this table. I don't want to get blasted. So the first one here was the one that we discovered. Some scale. Oh, they're coming off easy. I think the last spray did its job. Sidetracked. This was the one that had the spikes showing when I got back from Ireland, which was a nice surprise. This spike is pushing on at a rate of knots. I don't know how long I've been back now, a week, but that's grown an inch and a half. So that one's pushing on well. It looks like there may only be 2 buds, but there's still time for more, but I think that's going to have 2 buds. The other spike is tucked down in there, which was just a tiny little nubbin last time we looked, but it is going to be a spike. And obviously this type chucks the spike straight out from between the bifoliate leaves. No sheath, nothing, straight out with it, which is good. Saves waiting. The ones that annoy me a little bit, although that's just how they are the ones that mature in the growing season, produce their sheath, but don't... Actually, this one's got a lot of scale on it. They are coming straight off, though. So I think they may well have taken a bite out of something nasty and died, but I'll have to keep my eye on it. But yeah, sheaths that form at the end of the growing season but don't bloom till spring, they keep you waiting, don't they? And often they go brown and you sort of think, I'm not going to get any blooms, but if you've got those types you will get used to that, because that's what they do. You know, they do have an annual growth cycle, but it's got that delay built into it. And certainly in Rachel's book, some of the species that have that growth pattern, that do effectively stall after producing the sheath, do actually need a bit of a rest. Yeah, so you know, it's the sort that you need to ease off a bit on the water and feed, because they've finished growing, but they're not going to produce the buds yet. So there's like a delay, and during that delay they don't need lots of food and water, because they've stopped growing. So, albeit that's probably through your winter time when they wouldn't be doing much anyway, but yeah, just take a bit of care with those sort. They, you know, certainly in the species type that grow that way, they do seem to want that rest. It's not like a dendrobium rest where you don't, you know, you withhold water badly. Obviously you don't want things starting to desiccate, but just sort of ease off, if you see what I mean. Not so frequent, and lower the feed down. And it seems to trigger better blooms and stronger growths in the next year, so it's worth having a think about. Anyway, this one's coming on nicely, and that is, I forgot to say, it's the one with a strange name, Little Lemon Drops, yellow, with a name like that, crossed with Catlatonia Why Not. It'll be a first time blooming. It's just going to be interesting to see what I've ended up with there. Relatively new acquisition, I think at the beginning of this year, something like that. So coming on. Now this is the one that's had the not so adequate past life, I'll call it, and that's the polite version. The plant that I got was up to there. It is a bifoliate, but I mean it's pushed out all sorts of unusual shaped growths, hanging over sideways, leaves. Well, that leaf was damaged in transport, so you can't really count that. But this is the first good, strong, upright growth that it's produced, with good size, strong leaves in the appropriate shape. So it's getting back to normal now. As that rhizome extended and the pseudobulb grew, it produced a lot of new roots. And it's now producing some more, having just finished blooming. So its root progress on this one is almost continuous, or appears to be. Now what I'm hoping to do with this plant is, now that I've got it to grow upright, obviously the next new growth will come out somewhere in this area, and hopefully will grow upright again. When this does need to come out of the pot, the back end of the plant can come off. Yeah, once it's got some strength and some shape to it, this back end can just come off. this is the reason why it's so high in the pot. I tried to keep as many pseudobulbs as possible when I potted this one up. And this is Harrisoniana. It's effectively two named varieties, so it's Volcano Cream crossed with Binot, but it's basically the species Harrisoniana. And attractive blooms, and I think it's now going to grow what I'll call properly. Nice upright canes, yeah, nice pair of leaves and good root system supporting it. So it's coming on well, that one. And it will eventually look like quite a nice plant, I'm sure. Not that it does now. Well, this is a community pot full of 3 back bulbs with a single growth and 2 reasonable bits. It's Bulbophyllum, Elizabeth and Buckleberry. And it's being a nuisance at the moment because it's produced 2 spikes in opposite directions. This one is not fully open yet, but it's forming quite a nice shape. It's getting its length, but not fully opened at the base yet, so you can't actually see the shape near the top. But coming soon, and another spike heading off into the mist at the back there. But it's growing quite nicely since it went in this pot. Masses of new roots pushing out all over the place. So it seems to like it in here. The only problem with it is this is quite soft clay, so it takes quite a bit of watering. An awful amount of water has to go in there to hydrate it properly, and then obviously the softer clay promptly sucks it out again, so I have to keep my eye on this one. The frequency of watering comes round more than the other Holey clay pots with this one. It's also a Bulbophyllum and shouldn't dry out totally anyway, so I have to keep my eye on this one. It's chucking roots out all over the place in there. So coming on well, a good pot full. Hopefully we've certainly got 2 blooms there. They'll be probably on the latest growths of the more mature elements of the plants, and the back bulb divisions have probably got to grow another bulb before they think about it. But anyway, 2 spikes on that, opening soon. Now this not so pretty plant, but I'm not having it said that it was me, because all the old tatty bits on this were there when I got it. That's just the way it goes. In fact, this was my growth over here, which the leaves aren't too bad on there. That split on there I just think was either too much hydration or not enough, but it's slight damage on those 2 leaves. But the latest growth on here has actually split its dry sheath and is pushing up quite well. Now these are large blooms, and looking at that bud, I think there's going to be 4 blooms on this. Now, if that's true, that's going to be quite a show. These are large blooms, and it's also got another stonking new growth pushing up behind. There's no reason why this won't bloom as well. Obviously immature at the moment, but this is a large plant. I mean, this is a good 16-17 inches tall. This next growth is going to be out of the pot, so be it. But that's Cattleya Angel Heart. Most of the roots have actually come out the bottom of the pot and out the sides and now sit in the tray. And I'm quite happy with that because they're easy to hydrate. You know, I water it and then just make sure there's some extra water in the tray, and these roots get fully hydrated, so it's working. 2 lovely clean leaves coming out on this one, 2 lovely clean leaves on here, and that looks like that's going to be quite a spike. Yeah, as long as the blooms open and separate and don't get all squashed up together, that's down to me keeping it well hydrated while the buds are developing. A shortfall in water and feed at that time can hold the buds closer to the stem, and then they'll crowd each other. They won't get that separation, so you need to keep at them as they're developing and give them the chance to spread out and separate. They look so much better like that. So coming on well, that one. Well, this is another one of the relatively recent acquisitions. Obviously blooming size. There's remnants of a bloom spike on virtually every growth on this plant, so I was expecting the next set of new growths to bloom anyway. This is the most mature. That's got a good sheath, no swelling at the base yet, and then there's another 2 new growths here pushing on. Yeah, I got a feeling this is one of those that is a bifoliate, and the latest growth here is bifoliate. These 2 look like they might not be. Yeah, they might actually be single-leaved blooms, because these don't look like leaves, they look like sheaths. But we'll wait and see. This one's got a name about 8 foot long, I think. Cattleya. Shinfong, Little Sun, Young Min, Golden Boy. I think it's going to be black. Yeah, I mean, there's no chance of that being nice sort of yellow colours, I don't think, or possibly orange. But anyway, this will be the next growth to bloom, hopefully followed by the other 2 new growths. So we should get a nice succession on that one. I think that'll be a first time bloomer. If it's not, there'll be a pop-up. This is another one of the larger Cattleyas. This is actually classed as BLC, Young Min Orange, but quite a few of the Brassavolias and Lalias have been moved to Cattleya. Some of the Cattleyas have been moved out, so who knows. But it's definitely Young Min Orange, whatever the bit on the beginning is. This is a new growth, pushed on nicely, full size. Again, a bifoliate that sometimes has single-leaved bulbs, as is this one. A massive sheath on this, and I don't know whether you'll be able to see this. You can probably see it best from there. This one has a double sheath. So it pushes up a large sheath, and then pushes up another sheath inside, and then the buds come out from there. There is a slight swelling at the base of that, so I think the buds are actually starting to grow inside there. But obviously very, very well protected inside a double sheath. And there's another new growth round this side, which also has its sheath formed, but this one's a little bit behind. That should give us a succession of blooms. Again, medium to large blooms, bright orange, and normally quite a lot of them. So it's like a cluster of Cattleya blooms. It looks very, very nice. In fact, I believe if you look at the little picture, the little circular picture that you get that goes with my channel, I think that is this plant. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the one I chose. But 2 new growths, 2 sheaths, one with buds forming and one to follow on. So that should be good. Another large plant that's probably 14, 15 inches tall, so it takes up a fair bit of space, but growing well and regular bloomer. I've had this one a while now. Now this is a no ID Cattleya, and I'm still hoping that this is going to bloom, but I split the plant in 2, took the old part of the plant out, and the best bit actually went to somebody else, and I kept the not quite so good piece, shall we say. But it has produced a nice growth, yeah, and it has got a sheath, so I'm hoping it's going to bloom. This has the large magenta style Cattleya blooms on it, what you'd call almost the typical Cattleya look, and hopefully this will bloom despite its major disturbance and being split. But yet again, another one, fully mature bulb, sheath formed, and only now is it producing its new roots. Yeah, so the best time to repot this one is not when the new growth comes. It's wait for the roots. It doesn't matter how long, just patiently wait, and when you see the new roots, if you need to, that's your time to get at it. And quite honestly, I'd do it even if it was in the middle of the winter, if it was the right time. But then I'm a bit harsh sometimes. But yeah, the time to get at Cattleyas is when you see those new roots pushing out. These are a bit too young yet. They could easily damage. But when they get about an inch or so, maybe 1.5 inches long, they're okay to move, and just be careful. Each root is precious. Yeah. So yeah, coming on that one, it should bloom on that growth. I don't see why not. And this, strictly speaking, is still a little rescue plant. It's an SC, so Sophrocattleya, but virtually all the Sophronitis were moved to Cattleya, so it's a Cattleya. Rose Pixie Pinafore. And I think it's coming out of being classed as a rescue, because the latest new growth produced a good root system for the first time. I'm pretty confident this plant in its earlier days actually had Fusarium, but it had appropriate treatment, and it now seems to be growing clean, and it's produced a sheath on virtually every growth, and it hasn't bloomed. So maybe this time, fingers crossed, we'll see. If If it doesn't bloom on this one, I highly expect it to bloom on the next one, because it's the front part of this plant is now recovered. Roots are keeping their green tips in the main, and reasonable sized pseudo bulb, nice and plump. So it may bloom, it may not. That's a definite wait and see. But I think it's sort of recovered itself okay. And this monster is a variety of Laelia purpurata. Variety, oh, I've forgotten now, purpurea or something, I think. Where are we? Come up here. Purpurata variety Atropurpurea. Methinks it might have some tinges of purple on it. Certainly the Laelia purpurata is a beautiful bloom, and hopefully this variety is a sort of better version of it. Oh, that's not going to go back in there. The roots are absolutely solid around the edge of the pot. There's no room for the tag to go in anymore. To just sit on the top for now. 2 good new growths last season, didn't bloom. 2 good new growths this season, you'd better bloom. There's no way this is not blooming size. There's no sign of anything going on in the latest new growth yet. There is a tiny little nubbin in there, but it's done that every time before and still not bloomed. The other new growth around here is in the same state. That is a blooming size plant, there is no doubt about it. If it doesn't bloom on these latest 2 growths, then there will be a reason which I will have to investigate, because it should do. Now again, it could be one of these that sits around doing nothing and blooms in the spring, you know, and just sits on its latest growth through the winter. It could be a winter bloomer, but we'll have to wait and see. But quite honestly, for the amount of space it takes up, you know, if it's going to be a non-bloomer, a persistent non-bloomer, then it might have to go somewhere else if I can't sort out why. It gets the light, gets the best light my Cattleyas get, and we'll see if these latest 2 growths perform. But it is a biggie, I should say. Those from the base of the pseudo bulb to the top of the leaf, you're probably looking at 18-19 inches, so it's a very tall plant. It's a bit lopsided as well, so it tips over. Has to lean on something to stop it falling. But yeah, we'll cross everything for the latest 2 growths and see what happens. Now that's a surprise, and I know it's not a Holey clay pot, but I've just moved this to get at these pots so that I didn't knock it. This bloom is fragrant. I've never noticed it before. It's delicate. So it's one of those your nose needs to be within 6 inches with no other interference from other fragrances, but it's there and it's delicate. Now that's a surprise and a bonus. Unfortunately the fragrance in here is dominated by this thing, the Peter Comp at the moment, and the Sherry Baby, which is just starting to fade. But yeah, it is fragrant. I shall make a note. Good one. That's another one of my community pot efforts. It's Cattleya pradix spots, and I bought one, and having got it out of the thing it was potted in, which I'll swear if I try and describe it, there were 2 plants in there, and then I was given another one that I assume came from exactly the same place, because it was potted in exactly the same way, and 2 plants came out, so there's 4 in there. It's producing new growths in many places, some of which are still quite juvenile and only just starting. This one's pushing on quite nicely, but if this one is going to bloom, it's probably only going to be on this growth. There is a nubbin down in there that may push on, but that's the strongest growth it's produced this year so far. Didn't have good roots on it when it was potted, so it's obviously had to establish a root system, which it does seem to have done, some of which are taking off skyward, some are burrowing, some are attaching to the pot, bowl. So the plant itself is pulling on quite nicely now, but whether I'll get blooms on any of these latest growths, I'll have to wait and see. But that's the one that looks most likely. That's as big as it grows as well. It's not going to get much bigger than that, so I'm going to end up with a bush with 4 plants, even if they only produce 1 new growth each at a time. It's still going to bush up at quite a rate. Okay, you might say it's cheating, there's 4 plants in there, but I don't care. 4 plants, possibility of 4 leads, possibility of 4 bloom spikes, so I'm all for that. But yeah, it's growing on nicely, and some of the new growths are pushing on, and that's the first one to mature, so we'll see how that one goes. Now this one had a bad start in life. When I got this one, it had a very poor root system, and it did have a new growth. Now I can't remember whether it aborted it or whether I broke it off, but either way it lost it. But since then it's pushed up this one, and I must admit that's one of the largest sheaths I've ever seen on a Cattleya type. It's half the size of the leaf. There's no sign of any buds at the base yet. We'll see how we go, but it's certainly a nice, mature, sturdy, new growth with a healthy leaf sat on the top and a sheath, so it is possible. It's another one with an 8-foot long name. Siang Yu, red pearl, red dragonfly. Yeah, that'll be yellow. I'm messing about with colours today. I'm very short on the reds in here, very little, quite honestly, very little. So when I had a go at getting some more Cattleyas to replace the losses, mainly Fusarium losses that didn't make it, I thought, well, we need some reds, and with a name like that, I'm pretty sure that's going to be red. Blinking better be. But yeah, massive sheath. So far empty, but we'll see how it goes. Coming on. Now this is not a happy bunny. This is the Rodriguezia liana. Bloomed earlier in the year and stunk the place out. I had to keep checking the bottom of my shoes. But it didn't seem to be doing quite so well on its mount because I couldn't keep it hydrated, and since I put it in the pot it's sulked. But where is it? Yeah, it does have a new growth just starting. I've only just noticed that. Maybe it will pull on now. That new growth should at some point down the line produce a root system, because the one it's got's not very good at all. And the leaves are quite desiccated. It's not hydrating, which is why I took it off the mount, because it wasn't hydrating. But quite a dramatic change from masses of aerial roots suddenly getting sunken in a pot. So the chances are a lot of those roots have just gone. But a new growth, and for me that's a stinker. I certainly love the blooms. They're very attractive and unusual shaped, but the smell I did not like at all. Rachel said that her family tried smelling it and they had hints of bacon. Well, I certainly didn't. I love bacon. It's not a very flowery smell though, is it? But yeah, at least I have a new growth, so it may pull on now. Now this is my Laelia anceps, and I've got a problem with this. This latest new growth is fine, and the spike is starting to grow. But the other new growth has flopped, yeah? And in doing so has closed that gap, which is where the spike will try and push out of. So I'm just going to tie that loosely so that there's a gap down through there, and then if it does spike, which it should do, it's got a place to go rather than being all caught up and bent. Now that could be as a result of this being a cool grower, and as a consequence it just objected to the heat and wasn't hydrating enough within that heat, if you see what I mean. It could be. It's never done that before, and the difference this year is the heat. I mean, so far I think it bloomed on one growth, pushed up 2 new growths, they both bloomed, and now I've got 2 new growths that should bloom. One of them will, but I need to help this one, so I'm just going to have to try and tie that in such a way that, see, the sheath is in there, sorry, the spike. It is there, but it needs room to escape. It needs some air above it, and as soon as it gets its strength, the leaf won't matter anymore, so I'm just going to loosely tie that in an upright position. You can just strap it to one of the other leaves like that. I need to get that done while I think of it, otherwise it will just get forgotten. So I'll do that now. Okay, so I've just formed a little loop around one of the older leaves. It's not pinching, it's just held in place, and then just a loose loop that is virtually not even touching the leaf. It's not tied onto that leaf, the leaf's just hanging in there. And I can now see the start of the spike. Well, if I can see it, it can see daylight. So it can push its way out and get some strength in it and straighten up. I think this one's okay. It's already found its way out. But yeah, that one could have struggled and I could have lost the spike as a consequence. So it's worth a little bit of effort just to try and straighten that leaf up, even if it's only temporarily, but that should do the job. Well, this is BC Mackay, and if it blooms, these are some of my favourite Cattleya types of the smaller bloom variety, because these aren't giant blooms. Now this has taken a while to get going this year, probably insufficient roots for the size of the plant in that heat. Just the combination. Without the heat, I think this would have taken off a bit quicker, but it has produced a lot of new growths and is still doing so. And with those new growths, it's slowly but surely establishing a new root system. You can see plenty of new roots coming, and some of the new growths do have sheaths. So in theory, we should get some blooms. A sheath here, sheath here. So there are some sheaths in amongst here. If it is going to bloom this winter, it'll probably be a sparse blooming, and this is probably going to really perform as we go into next winter. So you know, once this root system's really picked up and taken over that pot, and a load more new growths will form then, so we should get a good blooming next winter. If I get some this winter, I'll be happy, because at least, you know, at least some of the new growths have performed. This came off a very large plant, so despite being a large plant, I wouldn't have minded seeing the original if that's a piece of it. But yeah, it's coming on. We do have good roots starting to push out. They'll get down in the pot and support the new growths, and then I think next year this is going to grow like a weed. But this year it's taken a little longer than I expected to establish itself, but it is doing that. There are a lot of older roots on it, and I didn't take them off on the grounds they can branch, but they're buried down in the pot, so I don't know whether they branched or whether they failed. But nonetheless, we do have new roots coming, and the odd sheath here and there. Well, this is a no ID Cattleya. For reasons unknown, it aborted one of its new growths, but nonetheless it did push up a second one, which now has a sheath. Now this is something I rarely do. I've just trimmed the top of that sheath. The reason is that looks like possibly excess moisture on the inside, yeah, and obviously if that gets down into the crown of that growth, it'll take the spike out. So I've just trimmed that, which is not like me, to get some air down in there. Basically there are marks on that sheath, so I'm hoping the spike can still survive whatever that is. Looking down in there, there's either a second sheath. You're not going to see it on the camera. There's either a second sheath or the start of a spike right down at the base there. So hopefully by, in this case, letting some air in should dry that sheath off on the inside if there is any moisture in there, and hopefully it will get going. But yeah, I haven't seen that happen on a sheath before, so we'll see what happens with that one. I may lose the blooms on that new growth. It is possible, but we'll wait and see. But that should give it its best chance, get some air in there, and see if the spike can get going. Now, this is a Varnagara apple blossom, and quite honestly I don't care what it's been renamed to. I'm not interested. When this cross was first produced, it caused a storm. The delicate colours, combinations of pinks and almost peachy colours, and its extremely pleasant fragrance that reminds people of freesias. It was a stunning cross, and that's what it was called then, and in my grow room it'll be called that forevermore. I'm not mucking about with this one. The name means something. It was a special cross. You can play with it all you like, it's staying the same. Latest growth on this, maturing, not fully matured, but the sheath is forming. This has been a reliable bloomer since I got it, so each new growth, singular, because that's all it's ever done for me, has produced blooms. So I see no reason why it won't this time. But it would be good if this could get a second lead, you know, and get a pair of growths going. But it hasn't done it so far. So far it's one lead at a time, one a year, one set of blooms. But at least it does it reliably, you know. So coming on, Now these two always end up being last. There's a good reason for that. These were absolutely full of fusarium at one point, and although they've been treated, they're still not growing well enough for me to be happy enough for them to ever share water. So they always get left till last, and then I can bin what's left over. Now this one, that looks like a good growth at long last. Yeah, it has produced some roots, not good. That was its last winter growth, very poor, but nonetheless did provide a little bit of a root system. And now it's doing that, which looks pretty good. The other one is just sat static at the moment. This little growth was its last one, again during the winter, and since then it hasn't shot out. And this one has a poorer root system. So between the two, this one is least likely to make it. But with that new growth on there, with associated roots coming out of there, that one should now make it. I've got a bit more confidence in it now, having seen that. And this is growing at a good rate as well. It doesn't look like it's going to stall or be a small growth or anything. But if you look at what it's trying to do, you know, these are the old canes. This is the size it's supposed to get to. Now, whether that new growth will make that level of growth, I don't know, especially as we're going into winter again. Nonetheless, that's the best chance it's ever had. So as I say, those two have to wait till last. So that's the Holey clay pot. So look round those. All sorts of things going on, from nothing to quite a bit. And obviously as spikes progress or blooms come, you'll be the second to know, because I'm going to be the first. See you next time.